In the words of Michael Scott, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. Today, let's dive into some of the old wives' tales and legends and myths that surround knitting, which is such an old historic handcraft, so there's a lot to kind of unpack here. I wanted to start with one that I think we're all probably pretty familiar with, which is the curse of the boyfriend sweater. And I have heard this curse, this legend, since I started knitting, and I think we all know what it is. It's that if you knit a garment for your significant other before you're married, the relationship is doomed. You're dooming the relationship by starting a sweater. And I actually upheld this curse when it came to my own partner, where now we're married and I'm starting a sweater for him. I'm working on it, but otherwise I basically refused to knit him anything but accessories until I had that ring on my finger. I think this one is like one of the more logical ones, where it makes sense that if you are spending time, 60 hours knitting somebody a sweater, like over the course of months, you are going to end up kind of speculating on the relationship, reevaluating how much you want to be spending all this time doing something for somebody that you ostensibly love. So this one is definitely grounded in kind of like a reality of skepticism, where it's not so much like you're besmirching the person who's going to wear the sweater. It's very much like sort of a contemplative act, knitting is. And if you contemplate on the relationship while you're knitting it for that many hours, then you might contemplate that the relationship isn't for you. It also is the sort of situation of a self-fulfilling prophecy where, because knitting a sweater takes like tens of hours over the course of months, a lot of relationships that weren't going to last in the first place end up fizzling out during the time that you're knitting the sweater anyway, which is just kind of like a natural course of action for a lot of relationships. Just don't work out. It has nothing to do with the sweater you're knitting. It's more just that's just how it goes, and you happen to be knitting a sweater at the same time, which is a bummer, but you can always frog it. So this one is kind of easy to see the truth behind it, but then also kind of debunk it. Either way, many people have personal anecdotes about this boyfriend sweater curse where they genuinely believe it or it happened to them. And I found a poll where in 2005, a poll was taken and 15% of active knitters said that they had experienced the sweater curse firsthand, and 41% considered it a possibility that should be taken seriously. So it really is something that people in the knitting community tend to stick to. I know a lot of people who follow this curse, and I myself did as well. This next one has been reported on by some pretty official sources like National Geographic, but since that reporting, it has been debunked, which is like kind of a bummer because it's pretty fascinating. But this one is about the legend of the Aran sweater. So in Ireland, there's this place called the Aran Isles, which, if you're familiar with yarn and different weights of yarn, Aran weight is a weight of yarn, and Aran is also a type of sweater that has a lot of really intricate cables and motifs, and mostly they're knit in natural wool colors, and they have a lot of repeating cables and very structural elements to the design of them. And this legend goes that if you were a sailor in like the 16, 17, 1800s and you were lost at sea or passed away or drowned at sea, your body could be recovered and you could be identified by the sweater you were wearing, because each family had their own cable motifs and structural motifs that were representative of their family, and it allowed the sailors to be able to be identified. Like I said, this one has been debunked, but there were a lot of like pretty reputable sources that reported this, especially, like I said, such as National Geographic did like a whole several page spread in one of their magazines about it a couple decades ago. So it really is interesting to think about like the possibility of that, where kind of just like a family crest, a family would have like a family Aran motif. This one is sort of, it's like iffy because, like I said, really reputable sources such as National Geographic wrote like multiple page spread about it in their magazine, which is like worldwide published. So you would think you could trust that, but it has been debunked because the implication of being identified by the cables on your sweater would imply that every single town in Ireland, and then further still every single family within the town, had a completely different set of cable motifs that they would use for their sweaters, just like a family crest, which is a really like beautiful and romantic notion, to think that each family is storing away these cables and saving them for their sweaters and passing down the motifs. But the reality of it is there aren't actually that many cable motifs to use, right? We all know a lot of the basic ones, and some of them can be combined in really innovative and intricate ways, but it really wasn't what was going on at the time. So I found the origin of this myth, and it originated in 1904. It was a plot point in a 1904 play by John M. Synge titled Riders to the Sea, where a sister of a drowned man recognizes him by a stitch she dropped in his knitted socks and was able to identify his body. So because of one dropped stitch in a pair of knitted socks, this drowned sailor was able to be identified, and that is, arguably absolutely fiction, just simply because if those socks were in the water for that long, they would have felted, right? And so would the sweaters. So, the logic is kind of gaping in this situation, but it's a really cool romantic notion to think that you could stumble upon a family crest type situation from a beautiful Aran honeycomb sweater. All of these sweaters are stunning. I'm sure I put some photos of them on the screen. They're all gorgeous and beautiful and intricate, and they've never made something even close to this. But like I said, there's only so many cable stitches and cable motifs to go around, and especially if you are a woman at that time knitting, kind of reproducing sweaters over and over, it would be hard to stick to the same sweater over and over and over for every family member. That's just not necessarily a realistic situation. This next one is found across many, many iterations, across different cultures, across different crafts. And it is that you should leave a mistake in your work. So this one is relevant when it comes to the Amish because they feel that only God is perfect. So you must leave a mistake in your handmade quilt so that you aren't trying to replicate God. The Navajo Native American tribe in the United States also had this belief when it comes to weaving their rugs, because they felt that your soul would be trapped in the rug you were making if you didn't leave a mistake for your soul to escape. So personally, I'm lucky because every single thing I have ever made has plenty of places for my soul to escape, not a concern. But a lot of cultures do feel that it is important to not sail too close to the sun and aim for perfection, but close to perfection is good enough, and mistakes are also totally okay. When it comes to the Navajo people, they would actually intentionally leave what they called a spirit line in their rugs that they wove, and I'll put some photos here where it was an intentional sort of seam-like thing in their rugs so that their spirit could escape safely. And just like I was talking about the Irish with their cabled Gansey sweaters, as we talked about in the last superstition, they also had this belief that you should leave a mistake in their really intricately cabled sweaters. It seems like for some cultures, this tradition and this superstition is rooted in the humanity of it all and just the natural inclination of humans to make mistakes. And in some cultures, it is deeply rooted in superstition and fear that their soul will be trapped in the things they make. But it definitely is, I think, a positive superstition because it just allows for a margin of human error where everybody makes mistakes in their project and there's no point in frogging back hundreds of rows because you slipped one stitch the wrong direction or something like that. It just kind of gives people a security blanket to know that if my finished project isn't perfect, it's okay, which I think is a good thing. One other culture that has a rich history of knitting superstition is Latvia. And Latvia is, if you're not familiar, they're really famous for their knitted mittens and their really intricate color work handmade mittens. And they have several superstitions around these very special mittens, which I kind of am endeared by all of them. They're really sweet, and some of them are pretty practical too as things go. So in Latvia, each type of style of mitten represents the region that they're from, kind of like the superstition of the Ganseys, but it's actually real. And they have absolutely gorgeous colorwork motifs. And let's go ahead and jump into the superstition. So there are 4 parts to the superstition. The first one is that mittens and socks that are knitted in summer will be warm, soft, and strong and capture the essence of summer in your knitting. This one's pretty practical for a couple reasons. One is that wool that's shorn in the summer off of sheep is actually probably hardier because the sheep are eating better in the summer and healthier than they would be in the dead of winter, which means they have more energy to put into maintaining a healthy coat, which is then used for the mittens. Also, practicality wise, you don't want to be making like a huge wool sweater in the middle of summer because it's just like hot and annoying to carry around. But if you're working on a little mitten, it's not going to cause you to be sweaty while you're making it, and it's portable, and it's just like a pretty practical thing to do, is make small projects in the summer. The rest of the superstitions are that one should not wash new mittens in an old moon, meaning a full moon, which I don't really know the practicality behind that one. The saying goes that they will lose their color and let in the wind, which is not what you want in a mitten. And the other superstition is that if you wipe your nose on a mitten, you will never become rich, which to me, as a nanny, it sounds like a technique for moms to avoid having their mittens get disgusting. And especially if these are knitted out of non-superwash wool, you definitely don't want like boogers and like gunk on your mittens because it's like pretty hard to wash it out. You can't like run it through the washing machine. So that one's also a pretty practical superstition. The full moon one, a little less so, but you don't want mittens that let in wind, so might as well stick to it. I know I'm actually planning to knit a pair of mittens this summer, so I'm maybe going to follow some of these traditions while I knit my mittens and see if it works out for me. Maybe I'll become rich if I don't wipe my nose on them. One more Latvian mitten superstition is that women in the Latvian culture are expected to create a hope chest for their betrothed husband. And in the hope chest, one of the expectations is that the woman knits a pair of mittens for her future husband. And these mittens are a bit more maybe special or intricate or beautiful than like your standard run-of-the-mill daily wear mittens. And the expectation was that the hope chest would be filled with not just mittens for the husband, but the husband's entire family. So you would be maybe knitting like 10 or 12 pairs of mittens for your entire new extended family, to share kind of your skill and bring prosperity to your new family. And you were also expected to dedicate these mittens to the farm animals that maybe you would inherit or begin your new life journey with, to make sure that your animals were healthy and prosperous, and make sure that the land that you got was also prosperous as well. The most important part was that each mitten had its own colorwork scheme and its own very distinct set of properties, and it was also expected that you maybe knit some of the symbols of the deities of the farm animals or the land or the region into the motif of the mitten, so that you could then be praying to them every time you wore the mittens and expect prosperity to befall you. So to finish up, I wanted to kind of just throw at you some more superstitions that I found online that were like a little less easy to corroborate, or like maybe a little less practical, but they're still kind of fun, and I'm sure a lot of people do follow them. And one that was particularly interesting to me was that you're not supposed to knit in the wings of a theater while going on stage, or you're not supposed to knit on stage either. And one of the reasons that a lot of us see sort of low quality stage knitting is because of the superstition. And another reason is because if you're not familiar, like theater people are sometimes really stubborn with their superstitions and they actually follow them, which more power to you, kind of like break a leg kind of vibe. So that might be why. Another reason that we often see and call out like lower quality stage knitting is because if a person were to actually knit on stage and like make progress, then each situation would look different. Whereas if they're fake knitting or pretend knitting, the knitting will not actually grow, and so it will look the same from play to play or from take to take if they're filming, which actually does make sense. So that's a kind of a logical superstition. But some of the other like kind of more random ones are like, don't start a new project on a Friday, don't knit baby clothes before a baby is born, because you want to make sure the baby comes out safely. Knit your hair into a garment to bind the wearer to you, which is like a little freaky if you ask me. But that also means that everybody who's ever received a knitted gift from me is eternally bound to my cat. So best of luck to you all if you've ever received a gift from me. Most of the other superstitions kind of involve like rules, like where and when you should and shouldn't knit, which I kind of hate that stuff, having grown up in like really strict religion. So I like the ones that I talked about. I think that a lot of them do have a practical application to real life, but the ones like not knitting on a Sunday and stuff like that, like I can live without those. Anyways, if you have any suggestions for more superstitions that you have heard of or I didn't mention today, please let me know, and please feel free to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.